Welcome to the first webinar in the Culturally Responsive Teaching CRT series. Today's webinar will discuss what it is, some theories behind CRT, and some ways it can be implemented in a school or classroom. The remaining webinars in our series will deal with various focus areas in more depth and detail. Culture is central to learning. It plays a role not only in communicating and receiving information, but also in shaping the thinking process of groups and individuals. A pedagogy that acknowledges, responds to, and celebrates fundamental cultures offers full, equitable access to education for students from all cultures. Two of the biggest challenges teachers often struggle with when first embracing CRT is understanding the role culture actually plays in instruction and how to operationalize culturally responsive practices. Teachers worry that they have to learn 19 different cultures, everyone's individual customs, holidays, foods, and language. This simply isn't true. Culturally responsive teaching isn't the same as multicultural education or social justice education. Too often, we use the terms culturally responsive teaching and multicultural education interchangeably when they're different things. They are related, but only culturally responsive teaching focuses on building students' learning power. It's important to remember that CRT isn't about diversity training, but about helping students reach deeper levels of understanding. Culturally responsive teaching builds students' brain power by improving information processing skills using cultural learning tools. This isn't an aspect of CRT we talk about a lot. Instead, educators like to focus on the effective elements. Keep in mind one way that the achievement gap manifests itself is by creating dependent learners who find it hard to complete critical thinking or independent learning tasks. When we focus on using culture as cognitive scaffold, then we're able to leverage students' neural pathways that make learning easier. Culturally responsive teaching is grounded in social and cognitive neuroscience. Neuroscience is giving us new findings every day that support why culturally responsive practices work. For example, social neuroscience reminds us that relationships are the on-ramp to learning, meaning if a student doesn't feel heard or seen, then it leads to increased stress. Stress hormones like cortisol impair the brain's executive function. So in order to create a learning environment conducive to all students' learning, we need to lower stress hormones by building those relationships. Culturally responsive teaching doesn't require teachers to recognize the cultural orientation we call collectivism. Teachers are often confused about how culture plays a role in culturally responsive teaching. Today we have schools that have many cultures, which would make it almost impossible to mention each. One campus we visited has over 76 different cultures identified and even more invisible diversity, which we will discuss later in this webinar. They think they have to mention race, ethnicity, or cultural artifacts like ethnic food, music, or literature all the time for every different group. Instead, a key starting point to making cultural responsiveness manageable is to organize instructional activities around collectivist cultural principles, group harmony, and interdependence. Vygotsky talks about this as socio-cultural learning and highlights that it's necessary to move students into their zone of proximal development. Here's another important point to ponder. Culturally responsive teaching isn't a program or set of strategies. First and foremost, it is a mindset. That means that it's equally important to do the ongoing inside-out work to build your social emotional capacity to work across social, linguistic, racial, and/or economic differences with students and their families. Too often, educators say that they are colorblind or don't understand the socio-political issues that lead to inequities in education, like disproportionate discipline outcomes for boys of color or low achievement data for English learners, poor students, and students of color in general. We have to make it our personal business to build our emotional stamina to address our own blind spots and biases. One of the nation's leading implicit bias scholars, Patricia Devine of the University of Wisconsin, compares implicit bias to habits that, with intention and practice, can be broken. Her research has found that 3 conditions need to be in place for individuals to successfully de-bias. Intention. You have to acknowledge that you harbor unconscious biases and are motivated to change. Attention. You have to pay attention to your triggers and know when stereotypical responses or assumptions are activated. And time. You have to make time to practice new strategies designed to break your automatic associations that link a negative judgment to behavior that is culturally different from yours. Debiasing requires a level of metacognition. In this case, you're not thinking about your thinking, but thinking about your unconscious reacting. Remember, it isn't about getting rid of our biases. It's about rewiring our brains to not respond unconsciously to the negative dominant narratives about the learning capacity of poor students, students of color, English learners, etc. We have to tame our amygdala, our brain's fight or flight defense mechanism, and take advantage of neuroplasticity, our brain's ability to change itself and respond differently to emotionally charged situations, like talking about race, culture, and inequity. So, do we insert culture into education or education into culture? Think about this statement. It will be revisited throughout this webinar series. Every classroom in the United States today is diverse with or without English language learners. Students have different socioeconomic backgrounds, religious beliefs, and family structures. Each student has his own individual personality, interest, and abilities. People from different corners of the world can be seen in the same classroom, and sometimes this diversity is almost invisible. This invisible diversity includes socioeconomic status, family structure, citizenship, sexual orientation, spirituality or religion, learning styles, and family histories. We will discuss this invisible diversity in more depth during the webinar on motivation. Many educators, in response to this, and because they recognize and welcome the bounty of cultures that are present in their diverse classrooms, make efforts to embrace multicultural teaching using culturally responsive instruction. Current research also confirms that today's diverse student populations will not succeed in school with the traditional teaching practices of past generations. Education experts are steering teachers towards practices which will make meaningful connections to the diverse backgrounds of their students, while emphasizing a rigorous curriculum and high expectations for achievement. This approach is sometimes referred to as culturally responsive instruction. Teachers should consider the cultural values embedded in the lessons, which might not be understood or shared by students of other cultures, and whether these cultural references might be meaningless or confusing for them. Though the gaps in language skills and background of students from other cultures may be overwhelming at times, teachers should find ways to teach and reach those students by building upon what they can do. According to Zaretta Hammond, author of Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, Promoting Authentic Engagement and Rigor Among Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Students, when she asked teachers what they thought the term meant, and more often than not, they say it's a way to get disengaged students of color motivated in the classroom by tying the lesson to Africa, Mexico, or by using hip-hop music. She gives the next 3 guidelines. Teachers don't have to learn 19 different cultures to be effective. Teachers need to simply begin with understanding the cultural dimensions of communalism. Most communities of color have this cultural trait in common, namely a focus on the interdependence of the group. It can be summed up in the African proverb, "I am because we are." This way of being is contrasted with our dominant culture's more individualist, pull yourself up by your bootstraps worldview. The saying, "Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care," may seem trite, but it is true nonetheless, especially with culturally diverse students. Culturally responsive teachers know how important it is to building trusting relationships with students who feel marginalized or misunderstood. The neuroscience is clear on the connection between emotions, trust, and learning. Stress hormones from mistrust block cognition. Students respond to a teacher's focus on care by giving her permission to be tough and push them toward higher achievement. It becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. Culturally responsive teachers know this and piggyback on these well-developed neural pathways with similar types of instruction. Tapping into these neural pathways can help students accelerate their own learning. Culturally responsive teaching is much more than just using the term. It's about helping teachers build routines, processes, and structures in their classroom. This webinar series will address motivation, management, engagement, and vocabulary language development. The goal is for you to find some strategies to help you implement CRT. So now that we've discussed what culturally responsive teaching is, what it isn't, who it involves, and why it's important, let's look at the 7 characteristics of culturally responsive teaching. Those 7 characteristics are positive perspectives on parents and families, communication of high expectations, learning within the context of culture, student-centered instruction, culturally mediated instruction, reshaping the curriculum, and teacher as facilitator. For the remainder of this webinar, we will drill these 7 characteristics down to the what, the why, and the how for each. What is this characteristic, why this characteristic is important, and how you, the teacher, ensure this characteristic is present in your classrooms. The first characteristic is positive perspectives on parents and families. Whether it's an informal chat as the parents bring the child to school, or in a phone conversation, or home visits, or through newsletters sent home, teachers can begin a dialogue with family members that can result in learning about each of the families through genuine communication. What is positive perspective on parents and families? Parents are the child's first teacher and are critically important partners to students and teachers. To help parents become aware of how they can be effective partners in the education process, teachers should engage in dialogue with parents as early as possible about parents' hopes and aspirations for their child, their sense of what the child needs, and suggestions about ways teachers can help. Teachers explain their own limitations and invite parents to participate in their child's education in specific ways. Parent involvement need not be just how parents can participate in school functions. Oftentimes, religious and cultural differences preclude active participation in school activities. However, parental involvement also includes how parents communicate high expectations, pride, and interest in their child's academic life. So why focus on positive perspective on parents and family? Constant communication with parents is an important aspect of a child's educational progress. Involving parents and families in their child's educational process results in better scholastic achievement. When families share their funds of knowledge with the school community, teachers get a better idea of their students' background knowledge and abilities and how they learn best. So how do we implement this? Seek to understand parents' hopes, concerns, and suggestions. Conduct needs assessments and surveys in the parents' first language of what parents expect of the school community. Establish parent-teacher organizations or committees to work collaboratively for the benefit of the students. Conduct home visits in which parents are able to speak freely about their expectations and concerns for their children. Keep parents apprised of services offered by the school. Send weekly or monthly newsletters in the home language informing parents of school activities. Conduct monthly meetings at parents' homes or community centers to inform parents of school activities. Host family nights at school to introduce parents to concepts and ideas children are learning in their classes and to share interactive journals. Gain cross-cultural skills necessary for successful exchange and collaboration. Research the cultural backgrounds of students' families. Visit local community centers to find out about the cultural activities and beliefs of your students. And tour the students' neighborhoods to identify local resources and funds of knowledge. The second characteristic of CRT is communication of high expectations. When a teacher expresses sympathy over failure, lavishes praise for completing a simple task, or offers unsolicited help, the teacher may send unintended messages of low expectations. What is communication of high expectations? All students should receive the consistent message that they are expected to attain high standards in their schoolwork. This message must be delivered by all that are involved in students' academic lives, that is, the teachers, guidance counselors, administrators, and other school personnel. Teachers should understand students' behavior in light of the norms of the communities in which they have grown. They should respect all students as learners with valuable knowledge and experience. Why? Because effective and consistent communication of high expectation helps students develop a healthy self-concept. It also provides the structure for intrinsic motivation and fosters an environment in which the student can be successful. So how do you as a teacher communicate high expectations? By communicating clear expectations. Be specific in what you expect students to know and be able to do. Create an environment in which there is genuine respect for students and a belief in their capability. Encourage students to meet expectations for a particular task and offer praise when standards are met. The third characteristic is learning within the context of culture. The increasing diversity in our schools, the ongoing demographic changes across the nation, and the movement towards globalization dictate that we develop a more in-depth understanding of culture if we want to bring about true understanding among diverse populations. So what is learning within the context of a culture? Children from homes in which the language and culture do not closely correspond to that of the school may be at a disadvantage in the learning process. These children often become alienated and feel disengaged from learning. People from different cultures learn in different ways. Their expectations for learning may be different. For example, students from some cultural groups prefer to learn in cooperation with others, while the learning style of others is to work independently. To maximize learning opportunities, teachers should gain knowledge of the cultures represented in their classrooms and adapt lessons so that they reflect the ways of communicating and learning that are familiar to the students. Why? Because children learn about themselves and the world around them within the context of culture. Students from minority cultures may feel pressure to disavow themselves of their cultural beliefs and norms in order to assimilate into the majority culture. This, however, can interfere with their emotional and cognitive development and result in school failure. So how do we have them learn within the context of culture? We vary our teaching strategies. We use cooperative learning, especially for material new to the students. Assign independent work after students are familiar with a concept. Use role-playing strategies. Assign students research projects that focus on issues or concepts that apply to their own community or cultural group. Provide various options for completing an assignment. Bridge cultural differences through effective communication. Teach and talk to students about differences between individuals. Show how differences among the students make for better learning, and attend community events of the students and discuss the events with the students. The fourth characteristic of culturally responsive teaching is student-centered instruction. In our multicultural society, culturally responsive teaching reflects democracy at its highest level. It means doing whatever it takes to ensure that every child is achieving and ever moving toward realizing her or his potential. So what is student-centered instruction? Student-centered instruction differs from the traditional teacher-centered instruction. Learning is cooperative, collaborative, and community-oriented. Students are encouraged to direct their own learning and to work with other students on research projects and assignments that are both culturally and socially relevant to them. Students become self-confident, self-directed, and proactive. So why student-centered instruction? Because learning is a socially mediated process. Children develop cognitively by interacting with both adults and more knowledgeable peers. These interactions allow students to hypothesize, experiment with new ideas, and receive feedback. So how do we create student-centered instruction? We promote student engagement. We have students generate lists of topics they wish to study and/or research. Allow students to select their own reading material. Share responsibility of instruction. Initiate cooperative learning groups. Have students lead discussion groups or reteach concepts. Create inquiry-based, discovery-oriented curriculum. Create classroom projects that involve the community. Encourage a community of learners. Form book clubs or literature circles for reading discussions. Conduct student-directed sharing time, and use cooperative learning strategies such as Jigsaw. The fifth characteristic is culturally mediated instruction. Ongoing multicultural activities within the classroom setting engender a natural awareness of cultural histories, values, and contributions. So what is culturally mediated instruction? Instruction is culturally mediated when it incorporates and integrates diverse ways of knowing, understanding, and representing information. Instruction and learning take place in an environment that encourages multicultural viewpoints and allows for inclusion of knowledge that is relevant to the students. Learning happens in culturally appropriate social situations. That is, relationships among students and those between teachers and students are congruent with the students' cultures. Why should we have culturally mediated instruction? Students need to understand that there is more than one way to interpret a statement, event, or action. By being allowed to learn in different ways or to share viewpoints and perspectives in a given situation based on their own cultural and social experiences, students become active participants in their learning. Research believes that culturally mediated instruction provides the best learning conditions for all students. It may help decrease the number of incidences of unacceptable behavior from students who are frustrated with instruction not meeting their needs. Also, students from cultural groups who are experiencing academic success will be less inclined to form stereotypes about students from other cultures. So how do we embed culturally mediated instruction? Research students' experiences with learning and teaching styles. Ask educators who come from the same cultural background as the students about effective ways to teach them. Visit the communities of the students to find out how they interact and learn in their environment. Ask students about their learning style preferences. Interview parents about how and what students learn from them. Devise and implement different ways for students to be successful in achieving developmental milestones. Ensure success by setting realistic yet rigorous goals for individual students. Allow students to set their own goals for a project. Allow the use of the student's first language to enhance learning. Create an environment that encourages and embraces culture. Employ patterns of management familiar to students. Allow students ample opportunities to share their cultural knowledge. Question and challenge students on their beliefs and actions. And teach students to question and challenge their own beliefs and actions. The sixth characteristic is reshaping the curriculum. Schools must take a serious look at their curriculum, pedagogy, retention and tracking policies, testing, hiring practices, and all the other policies and practices that create a school climate that is either empowering or disempowering for those who work and learn there. The curriculum should be integrated, interdisciplinary, meaningful, and student-centered. It should include issues and topics related to the student's background and culture. It should challenge the students to develop higher-order knowledge and skills. Why should we reshape the curriculum? Because integrating the various disciplines of a curriculum facilitates the acquisition of new knowledge. Students' strengths in one subject area will support new learning in another. Likewise, by using the students' personal experiences to develop new skills and knowledge, teachers make meaningful connections between school and real-life situations. And you can see here how we reshape the curriculum. We use resources other than textbooks for study. Have students research aspects of a topic within their community. Encourage students to interview members of their community who have knowledge of the topic they are studying. Provide information to the students on alternative viewpoints or beliefs of a topic. Develop learning activities that are more reflective of student backgrounds. Include cooperative learning strategies. Allow students the choice of working alone or in groups on certain projects, and develop integrated units around universal themes. And our last characteristic of CRT is the teacher as facilitator. A caring adult can make a big difference in the educational outcome of any child that is at risk of experiencing educational failure. What is a teacher as facilitator? Teachers should develop a learning environment that is relevant to and reflective of their students' social, cultural, and linguistic experiences. They will act as guides, mediators, consultants, instructors, and advocates for the students, helping to effectively connect their culturally and community-based knowledge to the classroom learning experiences. And why should we become facilitators? It's noted that a key criterion for culturally relevant teaching is nurturing and supporting competence in both home and school cultures. Teachers should use the students' home cultural experiences as a foundation upon which to develop knowledge and skills. Content learned in this way is more significant to the students and facilitates the transfer of what is learned in school to real-life situations. So how can a teacher become a facilitator? Learn about students' cultures. Have students share artifacts from home that reflect their culture. Have students write about traditions shared by their families. Have students research different aspects of their culture. Vary teaching approaches to accommodate diverse learning styles and language proficiency. Initiate cooperative learning groups. Have students participate in book clubs or literature circles. Use student-directed discussion groups. Speak in ways that meet the comprehension and language development needs of ELLs. Utilize various resources in the students' communities. Have members of the community speak to the students on various subjects. Ask members of the community to teach a lesson or give a demonstration in their field of expertise to the students. And invite parents to the classroom to show students alternative ways of approaching a problem. For example, in math, various ways of dividing numbers or naming decimals. So as we wrap up today's webinar, the goal has been to give you more than just an overview, but a general essence of culturally responsive teaching. The what, the why, and the how. There are many nuances and connotations of CRT, and as we progress through this webinar series, we will work to show you CRT strategies and what it might look like in your district, campus, or in your classroom. Keep in mind that there's no specific order that the remaining webinars be watched in. However, for the sake of continuity, it would be best to ensure that you watch all of the webinars in the series. Each webinar will focus on an area that directly impacts not only teachers but learners as well, and fits together to ensure a good working knowledge of culturally responsive teaching.